Hey, folks, welcome to this Rahu Eclipse case study class with me and Casey Scott. How's it going, Casey? Nice to see you today.
Hi, Sam.
And we're really happy to present this. We're going to be going back into several different iterations of the Rahu and Aries cycle. The I'm I'm sorry. I should say the Rahu eclipse in Aries. These cycles over even back into the late 40s after World War II, up until several, the last, four iterations, I think it is. And so Casey's done some great research. You should really celebrate and honor his work in this regard. I've done a lot of this myself, but I'm really happy to see Casey has done so much good stuff with this. And so we're really happy to bring this to you. You'll see some real prevalent themes throughout this presentation. Before we get started, though, I did want to also let people know about a few things. Like and subscribe and share this with others. Again, these case studies, this takes time. It takes a lot of effort to put together these presentations for you. I hope you appreciate them, and I hope you share them. This is a great way to learn astrology by actually looking at the events that happen. So again, as you know, on this channel, I do all kinds of things like that with myself, and also bring on great guests like Casey. So again, leave a comment, ring the bell so that you get notified, and share it on the different social media platforms. Also, again, if you're not aware of this, this is one of the 10 most important shifts of 2022 that I already talked about. And there's a free web class that you can get if you haven't gotten it yet, 2022vedicastrology.com. As you see where this arrow is, we're only about halfway down here throughout this year. There's a lot more coming up. And this is about an hour, 15-minute free class that you can get where I talk about these 10 most important shifts. It's really good now to go back and look because we have a few months into the year and go back and look at what I said. A lot of what I said about this Rahu and Aries, this shift and this transit of Rahu and Aries and this eclipse, also we'll see that reaffirmed in these case studies that Casey is bringing out. As you see, the thing that I have here, it says obsession with self and winning. This was kind of like an encapsulated, sort of headline that I put with the solar eclipse in Aries Botany, April 30th. So again, these 10 most important shifts, that's available for you. Free web class. And then if you want to get the personal forecast where I take those 10 most important shifts and explain them from your ascendant, from your rising sign, then you can get that as well. You can go to this website, your2022vedicastrology.com, and you can get that as well. So with that long introduction and a little bit of housekeeping, I invite Casey to start with an overview of what we're going to be talking about. And as you see, we have a lot of case studies and events that we're going to be talking about today.
Well, thanks, Sam. Thanks for everybody that is joining us live and watching it afterwards too. So, in the name of scholarship, it's good to, take this stuff that you've taught us what to do, right? Is interpret a planet in a sign, the nodes in the sign, and you can come up with an evaluation of it. And then you can kind of take that and you just kind of set it aside. And then you go back to the times it's happened before and just see what actually happened and see where it lines up, see it where, and that what that does is it kind of brings all that stuff out of theory and into practice, right? Where you're seeing how it really manifests on the collective stage of the world, right? So it's good to go back through history and look at these types of things just to kind of get a deeper grasp of how it actually manifests in the world we're living, right? And if we're talking about Rahu and Aries, right, it transited into Aries in the middle of March, right? But because they're these shadowy energies, it doesn't really activate until the sun and the eclipse cycle starts, right? And so to evaluate it, right, like we just talked about, how would you really evaluate what is Rahu and what is Aries? And that's kind of giving you the parts and pieces that fit together, right? Rahu is, the word Rahu in Sanskrit means to abandon, to give up, or to separate. It's this mysterious type of energy. The word even means mysterious. And the nodes are each shape-shifting energies. And, Parashara says to evaluate the nodes, you have to see it as joined a planetary ruler, right? So, or the house that it's in, it modifies the house that it's in. So that just tells us from that interpretation that it's shape-shifting. It does different things in different situations. So just if we're just putting Rahu and Aries, we're going to be looking at Aries to understand what it feels like, and then whatever house Aries is for you and your ascendant, that's what it's acting like. It's modifying the house of Aries for whatever your ascendant is, right? So, we can evaluate it on that level of the node doing this kind of mysterious energy, and then Aries being this sign of Mars, right? Mars's fire sign, right? So Mars is a very independent willpower, kind of this forcing type of energy. It's that kind of, like, I always look at it like the little toddler that wants to go and play with that toy and you say no, and it's like rebellious trying to do its thing. And the fire sign of Mars, fire is an element of distinction. It's an element of action. And it's also, kind of doubles down on the qualities of Mars, which is a fiery planet. And it's this planet that just wants to do something. Like that little kid doesn't want to wait for everyone to give it permission. It just wants to do that thing, right? And it wants to be sovereign, right? That's why the sun is exalted in Aries, is because it's the sovereign, and the sign of Aries is a very acting on its own power, right?
Yeah, and we see when we have these eclipses, these solar eclipses in Aries, it's an exalted sun. And of course, there's a lot of that willful independence. That's why the kind of phrase that I put is like, self-assertion and willfulness, or whatever I said. What did I say there? I said obsession with the self and winning. So you can see this image I also have here. There's a couple icons here. We have Putin, because one of the things was his election, his first actual election. He was first appointed by Yeltsin, but then his first election was 2004, and that happened right near that eclipse. And then also Muhammad Ali, his independence to refuse to be drafted and whatnot is another thing. And then there's other scandals that came to light, other wars of independence, like with Israel and whatnot, that we're going to get to. So all of these things that Casey is saying, these ideas and these concepts, when you go back and you look at events, and by the way, these are all events that happen very close to these eclipses. This isn't just Rahu and Aries. This is right near these eclipses. So This is why I said, like when Casey and I were talking about doing this, I even told him, I said, it doesn't have to be right on the eclipse, but right around the eclipse, like in that month or that season or right near, that's when you'll really see some powerful things happen. So I'm really looking forward to hearing these things that Casey also found out. And this really shows that, how these nodes show up, and especially that first eclipse that you have when it moves into a new sign, that's when it's activated. Like Casey put here, Rahu and Aries activated, because the eclipse really activates that new cycle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so the very first one we wanted to start with is, like we went 4 back, right? So we went to the end of World War II, right? And you just think of that time in our world as like everyone kind of wanted to be done with the war, but that's actually a time where a lot of new wars begun. And so, for example, this is when Israel declared its independence, and that was right at the end of the British kind of the League of Nations mandate for Palestine, right? And so the minute that expired, is when the Arab-Israeli war begun.
Yeah,
And
the end of
so,
World War II. I'm sorry to interrupt here,
yeah,
but yeah, the end of World War II was actually even the last events of World War II, like bombing Japan, was really when the Cold War started between the U.S. and Soviet Union, because the Axis power, the Allies, Churchill, Roosevelt, and then later Truman knew that it was really a battle. It had already started with Stalin, how much of Germany they were going to take and all that. So it actually started. Even dropping the nukes on Japan was as much as ending the war with Japan as sending Russia a message. I'm sorry, sending Soviet Union a message.
yeah, right. And you know, it was interesting to see in that time, right? The Soviets actually began regulating access to East Berlin, and all those events that were during that eclipse season were led up to the Berlin blockade and the Berlin Wall, right? And so, you can see that energy we were talking about, Rahu being this kind of obsessive, mysterious type energy, but to separate is Rahu. One of the definitions of Rahu is to separate. And if you think about like the partitioning of Palestine and then the blockade between East and West, and the whole Cold War is the two polarities kind of bouncing off of each other, right? And it escalating due to them trying to like win that, to establish dominance.
Yeah, that's great. I'm actually pulling up the chart here. You can go down some of the other ones here too, as well as you like. Maybe just do a bit of an overview and then come back and like we did before.
Yeah, and then in 1967 was the next time Rahu was in Aries, and then right away we had the eclipses, pretty quick after the nodes shifted signs. And so this time, right in that eclipse season, was one of the largest demonstrations up to that point against the Vietnam War that was happening right now. And the Vietnam War itself was a partitioning of North and South Vietnam, right? And it was like a proxy war of the Cold War, because of the two nuclear powers didn't want to get into this nuclear war. They ended up doing it on someone else's land. And so there was also a military coup in Greece, right? Which is that, that Aries energy of like trying to assert dominance and the military leadership, dictatorship. And then one thing that I thought was pretty cool was the first analysis of lunar soil happened during that eclipse season, right? The lunar nodes. And they said it was like damp beach sand, which was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then that thing that you were mentioning is Muhammad Ali refused to join the military, refused to take the oath for the draft, and ended up losing his whole title and all the consequences that went with that action. And but it was like a stand, right? He was taking a stand because he didn't believe in the war that we were in. So then that was also another time Israel pops up again, right? And they developed nuclear weapons during that time. And this was also an interesting period that I was looking back in this whole thing with Israel, because it's the longest conflict in the whole entire world, right? It's been going on for a long, long time. And the Soviets are kind of they were very supportive of Israel, and they voted with Israel to become its own sovereign nation. But then when they started to take the West's perspective, they kind of turned their backs on them and did a lot of sabotage against the Israelis and the Jews, because of they chose to go live more of a Western lifestyle or have the Western type of perspective. So they kind of shut them off, and a lot of Jews in the Soviet Union were persecuted because of that by Joseph Stalin. And then, in 1967, there was something that happened where the Soviet president made false claims to Egypt that Israel was beginning an invasion, right? And that led to all sorts of tensions that led up to the 6-Day War in June after the eclipse.
And the 6-Day War was that was like a very pivotal moment. And in fact, Israel gained a lot of land, and they gave some of it back in the Egypt, in the peace accords with Egypt with Jimmy Carter. But they gained a lot of land in the 6-Day War as well. So that event itself, we could see these themes with Israel both here becoming, both declaring their independence again in on that first cycle that you have, and then this 6-day war was really the first time, maybe not the exact first time, but it was the first, actually, it might have been the first time that they actually had to go to war over their new territory. I could be wrong about that. I don't like to misspeak, but it definitely was a major escalation of, because, you know, Egypt was trying to like say, okay, we don't want you to exist. And that whole, that you don't have a right to exist was challenged at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. And, both of those two are good ones to look at because the solar eclipse happened in Brahmi, which is the same nakshatra that our current one is going to happen in. And so I was paying special attention to that one. And it was interesting because I did this a couple of weeks ago, right? And as we're kind of doing this preparation, me and you, we're seeing all sorts of stuff happening in Israel too, right? There's tensions, and I was like, oh man, Easter might be a problem, right? But
also very much revisiting so much. I mean, anti-Semitism has always been with us, but we definitely see a lot more of, I don't know if it's a lot more, relative to every, epoch in human history, but it's definitely something that's, that's still with us, so to speak.
Yeah, just think about the reason that Russia went into the reason they gave that Russia went into the Ukraine is because they thought that there was some sort of Nazism going on, and they were trying to fight against that.
And here's this is the chart. This one on the let me change that. Let me just make one big chart. This is actually that chart, 5/14/1948, and as you can see, this is in that eclipse cycle at 6. I just wanted to bring that up. Tel Aviv, 4 p.m. Now, this is I haven't verified this or where this time comes from, but I think it's a pretty reliable chart. I think it's been analyzed a lot. 2954. I'm looking at this Sandi Lagna here, but say it's a Virgo ascendant, but aside from the ascendant, look at the other planets here. We have Jupiter in Sagittarius in its own sign. This Rahu up here. The sun has also just changed signs. So a lot going on here. Moon Saturn conjunction up here. Moon is in its own sign though as well. Look at the dignified planets, Mars and Leo. Interesting chart here, but this is that birth chart for Israel, and then that 6 days war happened the next time Rahu came around. That's when you had the big war.
Right, because the day after that one is when the Arab-Israeli war began, right? Is like they declared independence on the day before the League of Nations, declaration ended. And then the day after is when the war happened between Syria and Israel and a couple of the other countries. It was like right off the bat, the minute they declared independence, they had to fight for their survival.
They had to fight for their survival. And Rahu in the 8th definitely would show that tendency, right?
Yeah.
Good. So not to get too sidetracked, but that's a good thing to really look at, because the Israeli chart is definitely up for grabs here, and you can see they were conceived right during an eclipse cycle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they went to a big war again, that 6-day war, also right after the next Rahu cycle.
Yeah, and then if you look at 1985, that was an interesting one because the geometry just didn't line up. That there was a new moon in Aries, but it was just outside the orb of the lunar eclipse or the solar eclipse. And then the next one after it had just missed, right? So there was no solar eclipse, but there was a lunar eclipse, and obviously the sun passed by Rahu.
So there were two very wide, they're annular, I think is what they're called. So this happens sometimes. Yeah. Again, the sky is tricky where you'll get two wide solar eclipses and one, but when you do that though, you get the lunar eclipse, which is absolutely exact right on the nodal axis. So if you were to look at that, you could see two of them are very wide, and then the lunar eclipse is exact right on the node exactly.
And one of the things we'll see something about Israel, right? And then there we go. USA and Israel signed a free trade agreement. And one of the interesting things I wrote down there is scientists discover a hole in the ozone layer. And in the Kala Purusha, Aries is the crown of the head, right? And so like the ozone was like a hole in the head of the planet, right?
What's
So,
also interesting, this FBI bust of white supremacist group. Again, again, it's not like anti-Semitism, but it's a similar kind of like, there's a lot of white supremacists are also anti-Semitic. I mean, KKK, for example, have always been anti-Semitic as well, often, almost always. If not, anti-Semitism is kind of like the baseline motherlode of prejudice, to be honest. In the West, it's kind of always been like that. You'll see, like, for example, if you want to see how prevalent it is, listen to David Duke. He'll talk about the blacks and the non-whites and whatnot, but if you really want to see him go, but it's the Jews running everything. It's the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. Like someone even like David Duke, who is a vicious, white supremacist. He's against non-white, non-Europeans. So, of course, blacks easily fall into that. But then if you really want to get to what the biggest problem is underneath, it's the Jews. It's anti-Semitism. So this anti-Semitism is at the bottom of so much of white supremacy.
Right, and all of that is a very Rahu quality, where it's just like this imagined obsession, and it doesn't have to really make sense or doesn't have to correspond to anything real. It's just kind of exploded and exaggerated.
Well, the thing is that you get into international banking and you look at like the Rothschilds, by the way. So those who are going to say, oh, you don't understand, it's the international banking system and the Rothschilds and the Illuminati all comes from this same group. I've done the research and I understand where it comes from. I understand where the international banking cartel conspiracy comes from, right? To make it out to be that it's an anti-Semitic plot, and of course Zionism and that American Zionist. This is the original sort of conspiracy. It's like the conspiracy at the bottom of all the conspiracies is this one, and it continues now. It's not done. So even if we're not talking about blatant anti-Semitism right now, everything we see now with like, and again, this is just a honest calling of it with Klaus Schwab and the New World Order and the all of the stuff that's going on with the with where all of the big conspiracies are now with the international banking systems and the Great Reset. That's the thing that was coming to my head. That whole thing, underneath all of that is anti-Semitism. Like that's at the bottom of all of it. If you were to see George Soros, Klaus Schwab, the Great Reset, if you trace all of this back, it's anti-Semitism. Like that's the kind of floor underneath that they're all standing on.
That's a good point.
And so again, you see that it's fascinating that Israel was conceived in this Rahu in Aries time. And again, in many ways, that's the kind of modern conspiracy, the modern post-World War II world. By the way, that also plays into the New World Order. And this is all part of the New World Order, and look at how much these things are still going on. And by the way, there's legitimacy, not to the anti-Semitism Israel part, but of the international banking cartels and the International Monetary Fund. It's not like I'm saying there's no legitimacy to this. There is. But this has been going on for decades, since the end of World War II. And it's not just Israel, but America, Israel, petrodollars. The whole thing is definitely all working together. And what the astrology shows is we're seeing how this is a big theme right now. And this could be a big flashpoint. And like Casey even said, even this Russian war in Ukraine, underneath it all, there's all this kind of stuff there. This neo-Nazis, protecting from neo-Nazis and all other kinds of stuff. Look at how these things are coming together as a kind of ground floor that's at the bottom of so much of our modern world, whether we know it or not. The modern power structures in this world now are really, it's still a post-World War II power structure.
Right. And, looking in a little deeper to, the Soviet relationship to the Jews in Israel, I went back to even like the late 1800s, early 1900s, when the Russian Empire was expanding and included Poland in its expansion. They ended up with, before that expansion, there was relatively little number of Jews. And then when they expanded, they kind of shoved the Jewish people into this little partition, like this little territory that they called the Pave of Settlement. And there were, kind of like now where they were reduced citizens, right? They didn't have the same rights and ability to move around. And all of that was building up to why they were even seeking to have their own sovereign place of land, because of all the hate crimes that were going on all around Europe and around the world against the people.
And of course, not to forget Nazi Germany
as
well.
Exactly. But even before that, right? It's like that was like the culmination from, even the Crusades were very anti-Semitic. And then like that, all that built up to the Holocaust. And then after that, it was like, okay, we've got to give these people a place to be, right? And so with Aries being this place of kind of establishing the new thing, right? The new world and the fresh start. And so we could just go to 2004 now, which was the most recent one that we had. And like you see right there, Putin re-elected to the second term as Russian president. And, there was even just like recently where they said that there was some suspicion around how he actually got elected and the tampering with the polls and all that stuff to make sure, right?
There hasn't been a clean election in Russia in, I don't know, ever. I mean, because they had Soviet Union, then Yeltsin appointed Putin, and then for a while Putin appointed Medvedev. But again, even the elections have all been funny. So this was actually his first election. The first one, I don't think it was an election. It was an appointment from Yeltsin, and this was the first one that was like an election, I believe.
Okay.
But it was his first time that he was supposedly elected to like have a term. And
then China revises their one-child policy. I don't know if you remember that, but for a long time they had a one-child policy, and the symbol of Aries is like the female reproductive system. So the themes of birth and all that stuff are in the fabric of Aries also. So that was interesting there. And then
that's the Bodhani Nakshatra part. The Bodhani is the reproductive. Yeah, it's that part of Aries. Yeah.
Right. And then there we go with Israel again. This was the time when Yasser Arafat and Sharon were trying to establish some sort of agreement, and it just came down to the fact where they were going to give them a chunk of land, and it wasn't good enough. They wanted to have the fight over Israel or of Jerusalem itself, just that point of contention where they just couldn't come to any sort of agreement, which is exactly what we would expect during Rahu and Aries, where you're hanging on to that thing that you want and you're uncompromising, right? So, and it was just so close. It was so close to being able to carve out the Palestinian people a place, right? And rather than being refugees, they'd have a homeland. But that one point of contention just was too much to overcome, right? They couldn't compromise. Rightfully or wrongfully, I can't
I
say
remember
speak to
that
that,
time.
but
I remember that time because there was a much more liberal rule in Israel at that time, and Arafat was definitely more conservative in that context. And yeah, he wanted for the Palestinians to have control over Jerusalem. Is that correct? Is that what it was?
yeah, they
Yeah.
wanted to retake some of that land that was lost in 1967,
Right.
and they couldn't agree over the holy sites, so who gets control of what and who gets to come and go, and
Yeah, that's
just
why I kept pointing back to that 67. That 6 Day War was huge
mhm.
as a real pivotal event because of the land that they acquired, including, I believe it's the Golan Heights. I'm not an expert in the architecture, but that's land that was captured. I believe some of it was from Lebanon and some from Syria, I believe, in the 6 Day War. People correct me if you like.
And
That's
Jordan, I think, was part of it too. Yeah.
Jordan. Yeah, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
Jordan. Yeah, not Syria, Jordan.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's been a point of contention where Jordan has wanted some of the land back before. And I believe in the accords, I think with that Carter struck between Egypt and Israel, they gave some of that land back to Egypt.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I found pretty interesting was, there was the September 11th council that was trying to investigate what happened, and John Ashcroft blamed Bill Clinton for negligence leading up to the September 11th attacks. And then there was the leader of Hamas was killed by Israeli missile attack.
I remember this big time. Yeah.
And then the theme that we had in 1967, large demonstrations against Bush anti-abortion policies, right? So there's that reproductive system again. And then the large demonstrations that are pushing back against these kind of oppressive laws, and, the government kind of rebelling against it, right? And then this, the big story, big story, it probably should have been highlighted, was the Abu Ghraib torture scandal of the Iraqi prisoners by the U.S. military. It was a big scandal, big shame, and awful stuff. The
Just
more you
terrible.
read about it, the less you wish you knew about it. Right?
Oh, I remember.
Yeah.
When I was putting together that graphic for this. All those graphics came back. I picked the one of the hooded figure on this figure over here on the left. I'm sorry, on the right as I'm looking at it, and this unbelievable picture. And there was other ones of like the female soldier like pointing and laughing with a naked man, and there's dogs. One of a vicious dog. I mean, it was an absolute abhorrent. This is what happens in war. And when this war started, by the way, just to even bring it back to the things that are happening right now, even when in Russia and Ukraine, when this war, when Russia first invaded Ukraine, I felt terrible, not just for the Ukrainians, but for the Russian soldiers that have to go and do this stuff, because nobody wants to do this crap. No human being wants to go kill other people. Russians and Ukrainians have known each other, but I also knew, you have these young men who don't want to go kill anybody. They don't want to go kill a bunch of Ukrainians. They don't even know them. But what happens? It doesn't take long. What happens is it takes one Ukrainian defending himself to kill a Russian, and then this Russian is like, "Oh, you killed my soldier friend. Now I'm going to kill you." And it takes nothing before atrocities begin in war. Nothing. Because this is why in the military, they don't train you to fight a war. They train you to defend your buddy. That's why everything is about company morale, and you're fighting to defend your buddies. And then once you start doing it, though, and you have power, atrocities begin, like we're seeing now. And I'm bringing this up now to dovetail it back to this Abu Ghraib scandal, where once you're the occupying army and you're occupying a country, then human beings become absolute monsters and start committing atrocities. We're seeing it now in Ukraine and Russia. And this is going to be it's going to be impossible to forget this anytime soon. Because all it took, again, the Russians start rolling into Ukraine, and then the Ukrainians start blowing up the tanks, and they start using the missiles, and they start taking them prisoners and whatnot. Now every Russian wants to kill every Ukrainian because of what they've done now to them. And atrocities begin, raping and all this other stuff, and that's how it starts. Abu Ghraib, again, was when that popped out. You watch, we're going to start seeing more and more of this, of these atrocities coming out now. We're going to see more and more of that.
And on a little bit of a lighter note, I found during eclipse season in 2004 was when the Supreme Court in India ruled that Vedic astrology is in fact a science and should be taught in universities. So
I remember
great victory, great victory for us,
I remember this as well, and it happened concurrent with a big scandal. It's not a scandal, but a big thing in the West where it was a revisiting of this. You're not actually your sign. You're the 13th sign in the West. Western astrologers were fighting about their astrology and how it's not a real science, basically, in the West. And you have a bunch of Western astrologers saying, oh, it's not a real science, which, by the way, most Western astrologers say. I saw something online today. Today, I saw something online with this guy. He's not really, I don't really consider him an astrologer, by the way. He's kind of calls himself an astrologer, but he's just kind of like I don't want to say troll, but he's just always arguing with astrologers. And I'm an astrologer too, but astrology is not a science. Prove astrology, prove anything. He's always doing this stuff anyway. And I saw him today, like going after these other very respected Western astrologers who have done a lot of research, and these very established Western astrologers who have done a lot of research and case studies, and proving that astrology is repeatable. It is scientific. These are Western astrologers, but boy, they have a heavy lift, Western astrology, because most Western astrologers will flat out tell you it's not a science. You can't prove it's a science. And it's like, hold my beer. Vedic astrology is like, it's been scientific forever. And again, because they know what sciences are. You're simply reading patterns, and you can absolutely know what the pattern shows. It's just, there it is.
And, we've got the added benefit of the astronomical accuracy, right? Which kind of gives us that extra leg to stand on. Part of what I was noticing as we were talking about this is that, Mars and the element of fire are very me and mine, and then, like you said, it's me and my buddies. And then when anyone attacks my buddies, I feel justified to attack them back, right? To hit you back harder, because how dare you get involved in me and mine, right? So it has that ego. Fire is the related to the Kshatriya, the warrior caste, right? So it has a lot of that fighting element to it, right? And so,
it's definitely a time of warfare for sure.
Mm-hmm.
This is why all of us at the end of last year started seeing this Rahu in Aries, especially with all of these dangerous situations. It's going to be hard to say that there isn't going to be some kind of warfare going on.
And, I wanted to highlight the nakshatra specifically of Brahni, right? Because that's where this next eclipse is going to be at, right? On the 30th. And Brahni is within Aries, right? It's from 1320 to 2640, right? It's the middle of Aries, and it's Brahni means like to bear and to support the consequences of the Aries impulse actions, right? So, just like the Ashwini is like the penetration and the sexual act, and Brahni is the bearing the consequences of that. There's the pregnancy that happens. And so, Brahni specifically relates to this kind of taking the energy out of the spiritual realm, right? And then actually bringing a human being into physical form, right? And then it also relates to the other end of the spectrum where, Yama is the deity, and Yama is the deity of the death, or the god of death, right? And so it relates to like bringing a child into the world and also like helping somebody exit the body and go into the next realm, right? So those themes of death that we had in Pisces continue, right? And so there's a lot of that energy going on, especially with the eclipses. And Rahu has that tendency to magnify things, right? To amplify it, to make it, something that's regular into something big, right? So it has that capacity to do something large.
Well, I think we're seeing a lot of recurrent themes here. Again, like, even these themes of warfare and, dictator. There's comments here. I'm just going to bring up the comment as well. Bria Freeman said, I don't think it's all Russia in fairness. This is what the media wants us to believe. I would say driving force is Western imperialism, the American military industrial complex. Sorry, no. It's a dictator starting a war. There was no reason to invade the country like this, even if there were any kind of virtuous gains to be made, like in the eastern provinces where there was a potential for, because it's true that the eastern provinces in Ukraine are Russian sympathetic and whatnot. What Putin has done is destroy and decimate the entire country. And this is the problem that happens when dictators do this, is over time, the actual viciousness of the dictatorial mandate becomes watered down. There's no question that Western military industrial complex has a lot to answer for, no question. But the death and devastation in Ukraine is because Russia is ruled by a dictator. None of these Russian soldiers have wanted to do this. They were confused. The oligarchs, no one has wanted to do this. This is Putin's war from the beginning. It's been pretty obvious. And I don't think that's, I think this is the thing that can happen, is it starts to get watered down after a while. And we can even see like the militant individualism of this Rahu in Aries is like one dictators. Look, they haven't had an election in Russia since this century. Again, Putin was appointed by Yeltsin, and it's been nothing but sham quote elections and condensing power and then using that power as an autocrat. And this is what the Russian. It's not the Russian people or Russia. It's Putin. This is what happens when the state is one person. And again, there's a lot of blame to go around from the West, and again, but even the things about NATO encroaching and whatnot, there's a million solutions beyond that. And so again, even this Rahu in Aries shows the autocracy of dictatorship and warfare. I mean, look, have you ever seen Hitler's chart? It's an explosion of Aries energy. And so this is really part of what needs to be understood as well, as far as the fanaticism in the world as well. Rahu in Aries is polarizing and exploding that, like Casey just said, this I'm the powerful one. I'm the powerful one. Whoops. Sorry, this camera keeps moving.
You're so powerful, you knocked over your camera.
Yeah, right. No, but so this relentless individualism, which can lead to like dictatorship and autonomy and autocracy. Sorry, Casey, what would you like to say?
What would be nice to see is some challenge, some pushback on okay, so you entered this invasion because you believed that there was Nazism happening and people were being killed. Where's show the receipts? Where is it? If you can't prove it, you need to get out, right? That would be nice to see, is some pushback there, is you're justified it by this thing that you said was going on. Prove it. Prove that it's going on, prove it in the courts where we can all see it and be like, oh, okay, it was the right thing to do. And if you can't, get out.
Yeah. And the thing as well is that, again, we think we have a stilted media. I mean, we have media distortion. They don't have free press in Russia. I mean, it's like lockdown propaganda. Anyway, so I don't want to get too far off on that part of it, but it's such a different worldview and perspective. So there are people that aren't going to agree. That's fine. But whether someone agrees with that view or not, what is shown is the polarizing that's going on. And we also see, the other part that I think is very interesting is with the last time you said the large demonstrations against Bush anti-abortion policies.
And right, and that mirrored the anti-war policy, the anti-war sentiment of the Vietnam War.
Of the Vietnam era. But it's also, look at what's happening in the country right now. This is one of the things that I said, is that aside from what's happening with Putin and in Ukraine, here at home in the US, we have major social problems as it relates to these issues, not the least of which is abortion. There are states now where you can't even get one now, where the courts are moving to get rid of it. The right wing in this country is doing that. So I definitely would not be surprised to see some major unrest, let's say this summer when Rahu Mars comes. I've been saying this for the entire year. And if you go back and look even at my 2022 forecast, this big one, cosmic blowups and war, I didn't even have war necessarily on the agenda for right now. Mars Rahu close July 16th to August 10th. Mark that on your calendar, kids. Grab some popcorn for that, because that is going to show really a very dangerous time, I think. And that social unrest, like in the US and in other countries in Europe and whatnot, not to mention an escalation of war, let's say in Ukraine, is very possible. But this abortion issue is definitely a huge thing right now. This is a huge recurrence that we're seeing in the US, not the rest of the world, but in the US and the radical right wing in this country.
Right. And on a personal level, the way we can kind of control it ourselves is to recognize, like the little toddler that wants to do its thing. It's forgivable because they're just so pure, right? And they're innocent, and they're like the little kid. That's what Mars is in the mythology. He's Kartikeya, the child warrior, right? Where there has to be that innocence of the child and the desire to do something, but it's not anti something, it's pro something. It's I want to do something that's expression of my yearning of spirit, right? And it's not like this anti pushing against the thing that I'm rebelling against, right? So that's the way to get that energy flowing in the right way, is to channel it into that pro. What are you for? What is the thing that you're trying to express through you, rather than this kind of fighting against something, right?
Exactly. Debbie Carell said there have already been demonstrations in Florida. Yeah, I saw this in Florida, one of those states, but Texas, Kentucky, I believe Missouri or Oklahoma, or one of the it's the Southern Belt, where they're already really impinging upon women's rights, and some they're making it against the law to even go to another state. I mean, this is no joke. And people should have known when they voted for Donald Trump in 2016. This is one of the reasons why even people didn't like Hillary Clinton. The reason that those who cared about things like abortion and whatnot, Supreme Court on the left, it's like, hold your nose and vote for her anyway, because Trump was going to be able to support or to appoint at least a couple Supreme Court justices. And they're after Roe v. Wade. They said it. He said it in 2016. So this was the reason why, if people, even if they didn't like Hillary Clinton, voted for her, because you're voting against the guy who comes out and says, we should overturn Roe v. Wade. He said it. And by the way, this is why people voted for Biden in 2020 as well. I think at this point, most of us, we don't have the candidates we would like, but the lesser of two evils is less evil. And we're seeing that. We're seeing those, especially who want to preserve those rights, are now going, yeah, elections have consequences. And it's not just Supreme Court, but then Trump got to appoint all of these conservative judges in all of these places. And it's those district court judges, they're the ones that hand down these rulings that allow these laws to get overturned and challenged, and these rights to get taken away. And the Republicans, the right wing, the Republicans in this country have been playing that long game for a long time. That's why it's working. Because it's not just Supreme Court, it's also district courts, mainly. So this karma is coming home to roost. And the frustration of Rahu and Aries, the social frustrations, like we see the boiling over protest in Vietnam, protest of abortion, the last time that it went through. And as Casey said, we also had the symbol of someone like Muhammad Ali standing up for his, standing up for his individual rights. And all of us are a kind of nexus of individuality, and we can come together as well around those things.
Yeah, and we can even do it like in a very elemental way, right? Because the element of fire has to do with ideologies and opinions and decisions and those choices that lead to actions. And we balance that out with the opposite, which opposite every fire sign is the air sign, which is kind of questions and conversations and flexibility, right? All those things are how we counter what we're so fiery, right? We're fired up, but what we need is this windy conversations and dialogue and what do you want, and then the listening, right? That's the other side of the air sign that we always forget about. Isn't just talking but listening, right? So those things need to happen to kind of get the flames down to a manageable level, right? That's what we do in Ayurveda, is balance the elements out. When you've got too much of one, you introduce the other.
Indeed. And so well, Casey, anything else you'd like to add? Any larger themes that we didn't get to?
I feel like the main theme is just to remember that element of fire and the independence, right? The feeling like what happens when you turn the lights on, right? Because Pisces is a very dark energy, like it's very like the bottom of the ocean where there's no light at all. And then Aries is like when there's light, like you turn on the lights after it's dark, and it brings out that distinction, right? Which helps us be able to move, but it also gives us that feeling of me and other than me, right? And that kind of competitive fight that happens, right? That Mars energy builds up, and you're like, oh, okay, I've got to fight to survive with that Aries energy. To just kind of, like I said, channel it into something that's productive, to rather than be anti, to be pro what it is you believe in, right? And then people are like, wow, that guy really is passionate about what he believes in. And it's not so much about like counter, that contrary energy that's just so frustrating for everybody around you. Like when you're contrary, all you can ever do is have an argument. But when you're just telling and passionate about what you believe in, people want to listen, right? So it's a great way to kind of solve those problems that we're having.
Yeah, and so in a larger context, Rahu and Aries again is very much about just the power of the individual. Like I said in my overview, the strong individuality, and of course, in a cosmic sense, in a yogic sense, who are you really? So Mars gives that discipline to really know the self. In many ways, Aries is the most focused on our true self, if we want to see it in that simple way. The problem is we don't know our true self, and we don't often want to know our true self, and we think our self is this body, this person in this body who has a limited amount of power, and we're going to try to fight to preserve it and fight to conquer others, and we become like a little dictator. And that sort of dictator energy is basically Aries. It's like a military dictatorship, actually, because it's ruled by Mars, which is the military. This is why you see a rise of dictatorships and people that are very militant about power. Again, Leo is also the sign of power, but it's the sign of a king. So there's a possibility of graciousness and sattva and looking at the kingdom. It's where the king is in charge. When Aries is when the military is in charge. This is why there's a possibility of warfare and battling and fighting with others. Or you turn that on yourself and you fight against your own shortcomings. I know for myself, since Rahu has gone into Aries, it's been very empowering. And I've felt a lot of, willingness to actually go back and really look at the things that are going to make me individually strong. I've done a lot of yoga over the years, and I've done a lot of this, so I'm used to doing that. So transforming Aries energy into something powerful is incredibly powerful. But these case studies like that we're doing here is to also give an example, especially when we look at wherever Rahu is going. The world is often going to show us the worst potential. And within the worst, we can see some great, change and transformation as well. The Muhammad Ali, for example, or the protests against the wars, or the things that wind up changing and transforming culture. But the Aries paradigm is the fight. It's the fight part. It's not the compromise part. The compromise part is the Libra part, and Ketu is in Libra, kind of turning away from that. So when we see the nodal axis move right now, the focal point is on, if we look at it collectively, and it's important to notice other people in your life and other people in the world collectively are quite obsessed over the Rahu and Aries part, and expect that people are going to be like ready to fight about things. And so that's why we have this militance right now, that we can see in the world.
Right. Don't say my way or the highway unless you're ready to be alone. Right.
Hitchhiking.
Yeah, that's right.
Begging for a ride. Well, Casey, this was great. Thank you. This great case study where you've gathered back 40 years. Oh, is it 40 years, 60 years? I don't know. I can't add anymore. Where we go back and really look at the important events of the last 4 times that Rahu has gone through Aries. And people should really look up Casey's stuff. He's at his Instagram is Gold Star Astrology, and his I'm sorry, yeah, and make sure to also share and leave a comment if you like, and you can go get your own personal forecast here. Like I said, you've seen that slide, your2022vedicastrology.com. I go over the 10 most important shifts that you can, how they pertain to your chart, not just in general. So I hope you avail yourself of that as well. Any last thoughts, Casey?
Get that forecast. I get it every year still, so it's great. It's great. It's a good way to kind of collapse your year into a really brief summary of what to look out for. So
these touchstones.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, people should know, and I just have to say this about Casey. He does very similar to the things that I'm doing in this forecast. Casey has a coaching program where he takes people through the entire year and all of the cycles based on their ascendant. So again, really be in touch with Casey through his Instagram page. I'll have his links below this video. You should really, learn from him, follow him, see the stuff that he does, look into his coaching and whatnot. He's doing great work, great research, and I'm happy that he took some time out today to do this.
Appreciate it, Sam. Thanks everyone for coming.